Hello and welcome to this latest edition of YouMatter. Hi there. So this latest edition is a panel discussion with three physiotherapists who have combined their clinical work with clinical research. My guests are Gillian Campbell, Virginia Rivers Bulkeley, and Katherine Mcnabb. And I'm interested in the clinical field, having never gone down that route myself, other than a master's degree. I wasn't brave enough like these ladies to extend it to a PhD, but I'm interested in that world. But as ever, I'm interested in how being in that world affects clinician well-being. And you'll see that within the discussion, we were able to talk about lots of interesting aspects of what goes on in that world, what the positive and perhaps more challenging aspects are, but also how that might influence the well-being of the clinician in the process and ultimately the well-being of the people who we are delivering our services to. So I hope you enjoy this essentially quite niche conversation, but the fact that we were able to bring it back to more general principles of well-being and fulfillment, leaving a legacy, making things better, the things many of us are trying to do out there. Hello, and welcome to this latest episode of YouMatter. Today's episode is a panel discussion, and I'm thrilled to welcome Gillian Campbell, Katherine Mcnabb, and Virginia Rivers Bulkeley. Now, I've invited these ladies along because they all share the fact that they are clinical researchers, and that basically means they juggle or have juggled clinical work and research work. YouMatter is obviously dedicated to discussions around clinician well-being, and I was really interested to talk to these ladies about exactly that juggle because it presents a slightly different challenge, I'm sure, to I'm going to say just clinical work. I don't mean to insult anybody by saying that, but it's a different challenge that I'm quite intrigued to hear about. So I'm going to go straight in and ask Virginia, Katherine, and Gillian just to give us all, could you give us just a quick insight as to where you're at clinically and research-wise, where that journey, where you are at on that journey at the moment? Could I start with you, Virginia?
Hello, yes, thank you for having me, Jo. So, I am at the very early stages of a clinical academic career. So, I'm a slight newbie to the academic side. I'm an advanced practice pelvic health physio in the NHS and private practice, where my specialist clinical area is pelvic pain, and that is now also my specialist research area. And I'm just starting an NIHR pre-doctoral fellowship, which is fantastic because there's a new initiative from the NIHR to try and make sure they support clinical academics so that we
Hmm.
don't lose people from the workforce and that we can develop both clinically and academically and prepare, as people listening might know, those really big applications for doctoral projects and other grant work to actually have some protected time to do that.
Yeah. And just to be clear, Virginia, are you currently still doing clinical work as well?
So the fellowship is designed so that you've got 20% available to clinical time and 80% to your academic work. But the
Okay.
clinical work covers quite a few different interpretations. So that's peer supervision, peer mentoring, and supporting my clinical colleagues as well as MDTs. So it doesn't have to be entirely you in clinic for that 20%, but yes, still a member of the clinical team.
Okay. Thanks, Virginia. Katherine.
Hi everybody. So yeah, I'm a musculoskeletal physio, and I have done my research in a little bit of a different way. I'm a private, I've been working in a private clinic, and so I have juggled doing the PhD alongside private work for about 7 years now. It's taken a long time when you do it part time, and I can continue to do that. So I'm still just right at the end of my PhD journey and still doing the research, still writing up, still trying to publish some papers, and still seeing patients every week.
Wow, that sounds like a lot. Maybe we'll come to that in the discussion later. Thanks, Catherine. And Gillian, same question.
Uh, yeah, thanks again for having me. Yeah, I'm much more like Catherine actually,
Hmm.
because I'm not sure there were clinical academic careers when I started, which was quite a long time ago now. And I stumbled into doing my PhD many years ago, and it was a long process alongside being a clinician in private practice. But I've gone back in more recently as currently I've got a postdoctoral fellowship. I'm on my third postdoctoral fellowship in the clinical academic pathway, which has been fantastic compared to doing the PhD when I first did it. But it's on little challenges. So I still work clinically 1 day a week, but my academic contract is 80%. So
Okay, yeah. So it sounds from talking to the three of you that things have evolved, or certainly Gillian, through the longer period of time that you've been involved in any kind of research. The way things can be structured sounds like it's evolving, and there is at least some understanding of how difficult it is to try and keep going with clinical career, and as Virginia says, get these massive application documents completed. So, question to all three of you, and feel free to jump in rather than me necessarily directing it to anybody, but I'm just really intrigued as to what inspired each of you to pursue clinical research alongside physiotherapy practice. Can you all remember the moment when you decided to take that fork in the road?
shall I start? Because
Yeah,
mine
go
was a
for it.
bit okay. I stumbled into it, to be brutally honest, which is probably not what you wanted to hear.
Oh, the
I
truth, that's all.
I thought I needed to have a postgraduate degree to be able to work abroad, and I was going to do a master's. And then a friend went, "What are you doing a master's for? Here's a PhD you could be doing." And I thought, "Oh yes, I'll do that." So that was why I did the PhD in the first place. It wasn't very well thought through at all. It was funded, so I was really lucky there. Um, and then I sort of fell out of it. It was such a hard process that I decided not to do any more research at the end of it. But I came back into research now, which is a bit more kind of, I would maybe is the more normal route. I was more passionate about kind of working in clinical practice, and basically I'm quite old, and being sent down the edicts from NICE guidelines and all the other sort of, NHS, we have a large NHS contract, all the other things that we were being made to do that I felt weren't particularly well thought through. And I got frustrated with people not really critically appraising the evidence and looking at stuff that they were seeing as evidence of one thing, and it really wasn't. And I decided, now, if there's no evidence that's really showing what I need to be able to inform my practice, maybe I should go back in and do it.
Yeah.
So that was why I went back in.
Yeah, I get that. And that's a combination of stumbling first, and goodness, Gillian, I think most of my career decisions have been a stumble of some sort due to life circumstances. I totally get that. But then, yeah, also I completely understand this slight frustration that research and the pragmatic day-to-day side of being a practicing clinician, when those two things were not necessarily talking to each other. Yeah. Thank you. Virginia or Katherine, have you got a moment when you decided this was where I'm going?
I'm not sure about a moment, but definitely kind of a repeating pattern. Like Gillian, it was absolutely not my plan to begin with. And you can see that in the fact that I was a straight clinician for 15 years. I wasn't that person who finished my undergrad and was like, yeah, more research. That wasn't me, absolutely. And then as I specialized more in pelvic health and then pelvic pain, the gaps became more and more evident, and I'd relied heavily on the great work done in this space by pelvic health researchers. As I started to do more pelvic pain work, the gaps became apparent, but I also found as a clinician, so much of my clinic, so many of my interactions were apologizing to our women. They'd come with frustrations about the difficult journey to get there, the difficult healthcare interactions, being dismissed or potentially not even believed in their experience of persistent pain. And then would spend my time complaining to colleagues about frustrations about the gender pain gap and other things, and realized actually I should probably be part of this change rather than just being frustrated by it. So I didn't do a straight research master's. It wasn't an MRes. It was an ACP, advanced practice master's at Brunel, where they'd offer pelvic health masters. And the modules I took there and the dissertation I took there, because of what was going on in our service at the time, was really clinically relevant, but actually for a small master's project had quite a lot of impact. So I actually felt like I had the why from the women in the clinic, but also that kind of short dipping my toe in, which was a positive experience. And through colleagues like Gillian at the POGP, which is our pelvic health special interest group, they created smaller research grants to help newbies like me dip our foot in, find out how we could do it if we weren't ready to take on enormous projects. And that gently, those little positive experiences with the whys from the women in clinic helped me look at something that was a bit more pragmatic and offered protected time to actually try and do a little bit more of this.
So in both your answers there, I think I hear, well, I mean, if I'm just thinking, you know, as I said, bringing this back to clinician well-being, you've both described frustration, seeing something not functioning as you want it to, and almost despite yourselves thinking, well, okay, it looks like I better be the person to step up and try and change that. I know that one of the main reasons it's often cited for clinician burnout is experiencing moral injury. Now, you know, I'm not suggesting that the two of you have expressed anything to that degree, but potentially it could be, couldn't it? If you're day to day experiencing something that you feel is worse than just not very good, but actually detrimental, and you're having to go in and keep repeating that pattern, then you know that's going to take its toll. I think what I heard from the two of you was slightly lesser than that, in that it was frustration. I want things to be better. And to me, from a clinician wellbeing point of view, that speaks more to a sense of fulfillment. You know, I want this career to mean something. I want to have changed something for the better. Would that be fair?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely from the NHS experience, I know that talking to colleagues and my own experience, you know that on your own, we're responsible for our own practice. We can make little wins there, little gains. But I know that talking to colleagues and my own experience, if you're looking at service level change, unless that's going to be backed by national guidance, the commissioners are not going to be able to fund something where there isn't a clear guidance at national level to do that. And so it can be quite isolating. And I know colleagues who felt like, exactly as you said, kind of through moral injury and that sense of isolated practice, where if you're the one trying to drive change, but you're repeatedly unsuccessful in that, then people can feel defeated and quite low about that experience.
Yes. Katherine, have you got anything to add to
Yeah,
this?
it's really interesting to hear both those stories, because actually I've never really sort of heard anyone else say that, and it's actually really similar for myself, but in just a different field. I was obviously working privately and experienced exactly the same, where you were getting patients asking you questions about what you're doing, and you get to the point. I think it's just a journey through your career. You know, early on, you think you know it, don't you? You think you've got it sorted, and then the more you work, the more you realise you just haven't, and that those questions that you're answering, whilst they might be, you know, fairly educated guess on their treatment and what they're doing, you really know from your heart you feel a bit of a fraud. You know, you haven't got that backup, and if you are a clinician that cares about that, which I think we all are, then that is something that bothers you, just like you say, Jo. It becomes frustrating. So I definitely had a bit of a, oh yes, this is not right. I think I need to be part of that journey. Yes, I'm definitely like the two of you. I'm going to do it. And I was really naive and just went and rang a physio professor who I'd met many years earlier and said, hi there, remember me? Do you think I could do some research? And I look back now and I think, oh my goodness, why did he not just put the phone down? Unfortunately, he was patient enough to say to me, okay, Katherine, let's explore that a little bit further. Now knowing, coming from the private sector, I really don't know quite how I've managed to do it, because unless you have funding, and NIHR is a wonderful pathway, it's very one-sided. You know, there aren't many private physios that can actually do research, which I think is a real shame, because they have a lot to offer.
I love that though, Katherine, and I think there's something really refreshing about that. Just barefaced, ask the question, rather than the convoluted pathways we sometimes decide or have to follow. So, another sort of aspect of well-being that's talked about so much is work-life balance. And as I alluded to when I was introducing all you guys, I mean, on the face of it, to me, this seems like quite a juggle you guys are pulling off. How do you do that?
I think with difficulty, very much. Well, I don't think any of us would deny that this is the epitome of juggling. They do, I think, actually complement each other very well. My clinical side of my research really do, but the actual practical nature of trying to. So, for example, I've done 3 studies within my PhD, and 2 of them were patient-facing. So, I was going to either the university or the hospital for another one to see each participant. Each one had 30 people in it, and one of them studies I had to see them twice, so that was 60 visits to the hospital. I don't live near the hospital at all, so logistically you have to juggle things like that. And I think sometimes when people say you're doing research or you see research being done, you don't actually appreciate what's happened behind that research. And it's family life, isn't it, at the end of the day, whether that's partners, children, whatever. And I think it's more of a test of the people supporting you around and how you manage that. And I know a lot of people drop out purely because life events happen. And I would actually say to a lot of people, I've managed to be successful in my PhD purely through luck of not having a huge life event that stopped me because my time is so stretched.
Yeah, thanks for your honesty.
I would completely agree with that, Catherine. Like that was the main reason I dropped out of the PhD. You know, I didn't drop out, completed it, but afterwards thought enough, because you know I had a baby that, well, we didn't expect, which was lovely. But I had parents were both very, very ill, and I lost both parents during it. And it's just, if everything else is ticking on, and thank goodness for my husband who's really supportive, but if everything else ticks along, it's absolutely fine. Well, it's not absolutely fine, it's a juggle, but you really need a lot of support, I would say. Not to put people off, but and it's not just about the time management. I don't know if the others agree, but it's the headspace. You know, it's like you suddenly have to swap your hat. And that's really difficult. I know it sounds like it. You're working in the same field. You know, my research is the same as the work I do in clinic. It's kind of sport and pelvic health, and my research is that. But to suddenly change mindsets, you know, I've got a mentor who got me back in, and the number of times she said to me, you have to take your clinician hat off. You're not a clinician here. And you just can't wear the same hat in both. And that's really tricky, I think.
It is tricky, particularly given what you described about why you went into research, precisely to sort of keep your clinical hat on while you were doing it.
Yeah. And you ladies have got more experience further down this journey than I have, but already, even just with masters and pre-doc, I'm working on trying to accept that I can't do everything at the same time. And as Katherine said, I'm stretching my research out by doing my pre-doc part-time, and I would do my doctorate part-time, which suddenly takes it to 6 years or so. But that's not just to do with juggling with private practice and mentoring that I do at one end of the week when I'm not in my NHS role, but also to do with the headspace that Gillian alluded to. The fact that actually the hours of my pre-doc are the same as someone else who does it full-time, but actually allowing me to take a bit longer to think about things, to work out who I need on side to help me with this, who's going to help me with that next step, how I'm going to compose this, how I'm going to do that, actually gives me a little bit of headspace, even though I know the journey will take much longer. And I've accepted that I'm not in a hurry. I can't be in a hurry. That's not realistic. But also that I will miss out on some things. You know, I can't say yes to every opportunity. I can't attend every event. There are so many things, particularly when you're a bit green and enthusiastic like me, where I'm like, yes, I should do that. Oh no, that's at 6 p.m. on that day. I'm going to be picking up so-and-so and dropping off so-and-so, and that's not going to be pragmatic. So it's accepting the compromise, but that's still very much a work in progress, because I know so many of us want to do the things that we know sound great, but also have to say no to some projects that aren't going to fit into the time we've got to allocate to it either.
You're reminding me, Virginia, of a talk my husband and I went to last week with Oliver Burkeman, who wrote 4,000 Weeks. I don't know if any of you have read it. The general premise is that 4,000 weeks is the average lifespan. That's how many weeks we have to play with. And a large part of what he talks about is really what you've just said, Virginia, accepting that it's one lifetime and you will have to make choices about the things you can't do, which, I don't know about you guys, but I find that such a hard thing to accept. There's so many exciting things and opportunities, and one tends to lead to another. And how do you decide? I really, really understand what you all say about the discipline involved in needing, as you say, Virginia, to accept what you can and what you can't do. And from all three of you, try and have a supportive home life and not a big life event while you're doing your research if you can help it.
I think,
sorry, Gillian.
I was just going to say, I think for me, actually, COVID was, with everything being locked down, made such a difference for me. And it made me assess the way I conduct my clinic, actually. So, when everybody went into longer appointment times to have the wiping down and all the rest of it, airing the room, suddenly I realised actually that made my well-being so much better. And I'm such a privileged position with where I work. The person that runs the clinic is very flexible and allows me to continue effectively having that extra space. And that has made a huge difference for me. I don't know if anybody else finds the same, but it just gives me the time to spend in between patients, but also thinking about patients, because I'm not doing it all the time. And I can't just go bang, bang, bang.
No, I totally concur with that in my own clinics. We've done the same. People are running all sorts of different lengths diaries now according to what's worked for them. And I agree. I think COVID, albeit for reasons none of us would have chosen, was just sort of a wake-up call. Like, that wasn't really realistic. That wasn't working. Why were you expecting yourself to be able to cope with that? And it's still challenging now, but I agree. Having recognized that, what a difference it made to quite a lot of us to have that extra 10 minutes was really eye-opening, wasn't it?
Pace is so important, isn't it? Like slowing down, just getting there, but just doing it at a slower pace.
Yes, like you say, not being in a rush and just accepting that has to be the choice. Yeah.
I think that's actually, Virginia, doing it part-time, I think is actually one of the better ways to do it, just for what you said. You need a lot of time within research to actually process things in your subconscious. You get some really difficult times where you go, I just can't do this. I cannot get there. I don't know what this means. Your analytical thinking skills are being developed. And that really takes a lot of time that we don't appreciate, I think, when you start the journey. And sometimes actually then when you've got a couple of days clinic where suddenly your confidence is boosted again because you've been doing that job for ages, you just go in and do it, and then you come back to it and it's like, oh, actually no, oh, okay, I can see something different, or I know who to look to ask for help. So the part-time element of it is actually really good, but you almost feel that, oh, I only do it part-time, you feel like you apologize for it, but actually don't. It'll help you. I realized as I went on.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Thank you, Katherine. So just perhaps to move into a slightly more positive line of questioning, I'd love to know what's been the most rewarding things, or anything that surprised you in a good way about being involved in research.
I can definitely start with a positive surprise. Absolutely. I'm sure we'll come to the challenges later. Something that I was warned about, as I'm someone who's so used to working with a fantastically close team and have really thrived having a team around me rather than being kind of solo practitioner, I was warned that it might be a little bit lonely, suddenly predominantly working from home and running your own plan of action. But actually, as somebody moving from clinic to clinical academic work, I have been so thrilled to be so supported by a fantastic research community. Everyone has been so supportive of the fact that I've turned up, been totally transparent about how fresh and novice I am and how I'm looking to benefit from everyone else's wisdom in the room. And they've been fantastic, whether that be the POGP, our special interest group, the university where I did my master's and I'm looking to do my doctoral work, the NHS Trust, finding people who are already doing it and they have such a passion for doing it that they've been really welcoming to someone else at the beginning of their journey. So
And all credit to you that you've clearly gone in, very prepared to say, I'm feeling a bit vulnerable here, I'm new.
So that's what I would say to anyone who might be listening who's thinking, well, I'm used to kind of knowing what I do. And I know that familiarity of being a senior clinician. And I'm a bit nervous about going back to the beginning, or what feels like the beginning in a new element of our practice. Actually, so many of the relationships you've already built are how you're going to find your way, like Katherine said. And so much of your experience, people who went into academic life much earlier appreciate our clinical experience and what that can add to the conversation and insights, and even conversations for some of my PPIE, some of my patient and public involvement and engagement. I already have relationships with quite a few charities who've been fantastic from the work I've done as a clinician and building to that community of the projects I'm looking to take forward. So if one of the things that worries people is that idea of it being isolating, I'm sure that everyone's experience is different, but that is definitely one of the pleasant surprises I've found, is that there was a great community to support me.
Brilliant. I'm glad. Thanks, Virginia. Gillian and Katherine, any nice surprises for either of you?
I'd quite like to echo. I think you're absolutely right, Virginia. And the people giving of their time, senior researchers, I'd never have done it if it hadn't been for the women. I went to one of these trying to inspire clinicians into research sort of phase. I think I was one of only two people that had a PhD, and this woman who's really frightening, she was an OT, said, you need a mentor. And I contacted her and said, would you do this? And we've had some frank exchanges of views over the years, but she's been so supportive, and honestly, they give their time just so selflessly, and they're so passionate, like you say. I think the other thing I would say is that it's really good fun. Do you know what I mean? When you discover something. So I've done one of the projects I did, the outcome was completely not what I expected. And actually, after the initial kind of like, oh no, that this wasn't what we were hoping to find out, actually it was really exciting. And you think, oh, this is brilliant, and it's quite inspiring, and I feel like a kid really sometimes. It's so exciting.
That is good to hear, because you read still, well, I remember reading a bit geeky the Watson and Crick book, about discovering double helix and stuff about Einstein and things like that, and naively you sort of imagine these eureka moments, and you kind of hope that's what research is, but it's kind of nice to hear that there is a bit of that, Gillian.
I think it's at a very low level.
No, you'll equal that one day, I'm sure. Already have. Lovely. Katherine, have you got a nice surprise?
I think that's lovely to hear, Gillian, say that. You do definitely get, when you get your results, don't you? You can't wait to have a look at them and kind of process them. It does sound really sad, doesn't it? But it is. You work so focused. But I think actually it's a combination of both those things. You start your research quite broad, and gradually you get narrower and narrower and narrower, and you become so detailed into such a small niche area. Nobody else understands what you're doing. Nobody else is interested in it. And so that's the lonely part of it. You kind of think, oh my goodness, what am I doing? And then again, like Virginia says, suddenly someone will come along and want to chat to you about it, who also has that interest. And then, those conversations that you then have on a level that, where you both appreciate the work that you're doing is a really lovely feeling. It was quite unexpected, but definitely maybe fulfilling for that mental.
Just really feeling like you expert in that area, and when you're asked about it, you really get to show your knowledge. I can understand that. So yes, the flip question was going to come, wasn't it? What have you found the most challenging? I know from talking to all of you in the past that there's a whole set of requirements along the process, isn't there? Different phases and different challenges presented to you at each phase. I wonder, each of you, which of you found personally the most challenging?
It's when doing it as a career, I think I found I love doing the PhD. It was all about what I wanted to do. As a career, particularly as what's called an early career researcher. So I
Right.
don't have tenure, everything is about short-term contracts. It's so difficult. You're constantly, I'm halfway through a fellowship, and I remember when I got it, it was such a struggle to get. You go through there's a pretty low success rate when you apply for these things. And when I got it, I said to my husband, I'm never doing this again. This is the end. And he went, yeah, whatever. And then you've got the initial elation because you think you can just concentrate on the research, and that's fantastic. But then being halfway through, I'm suddenly thinking, what next? How am I going to find the next bit of money? And I think we're really lucky because we've always got our clinical careers. So we're never going to be unemployed, really. But it's actually really tough, and you have to be able to sell yourself, and that doesn't come easily. I don't know what the others think, but this imposter syndrome of selling yourself and saying, I am the best person, which I never feel like I am. I'm sure there are other people, and you look at other people's applications for things and you think, oh my goodness, what am I thinking here? I'm nowhere near good enough to do that. So that's the really, really challenging bit, certainly for me.
Yeah, the two of you, Katherine and Virginia, both nodding.
Well, I'm at that stage, I'm coming to the end of my PhD and I've still got research to write up, but I'm not funded for it or anything. It's done in my own time, is that. So I have, income at the end of the day is important. We're not doing this for love. So, like you said, we have our clinical background to go back on. I have some teaching that I'm doing, but in terms of research, you have to find somebody who will fund you to then do the research. And then, like Gillian says, halfway through that, you're worrying about where your next lot of money is going to come from. So you're focusing. And everybody you speak to in academia seems to feel this huge pressure that most of your time is spent looking for money or funding. And so it is, I think that's probably about the biggest stress or juggle. The independence of having the research, but then becomes independent in finding your work.
And that's new, isn't it? To us as clinicians, that's a new challenge. And it's definitely something that I found one of the biggest challenges, and I spoke about this in coaching, is that kind of awareness of the low success rate and the idea that lots of it's out of your control. If you come from a background where you're used to thinking, well, if I put in all my effort, then really I'm likely to get a reward for that effort that I've put in. And it's almost a known entity that actually graft gets you most of the way. To know that you can put your time and energy into something, but in a competitive grant application, fellowship application, that really the odds are against you, is quite a confronting psychology for me. And actually, when I looked at it more deeply, I realized that one of my challenges was not just about not having control over it, but the very public nature of it. The fact that, I had to tell everyone months ahead of this fellowship, I'm applying for this fellowship, I'll need everyone's sign off. I know there's a high chance that I won't get it, but I want to let you know. And I realized actually it wasn't that I was awkward about saying, I want to try something new. It was almost that I was awkward about saying, I think I can do it. Because unless you think you've got a chance of being able to do it, you wouldn't apply for it. But there's something a little bit awkward for me in my kind of established clinical field to say, I know I'm unlikely to get this, but I'm interested enough that I'm going to put myself out there, but I'm probably going to fail at this. And the kind of public element of that sphere is something very different to other parts of our life. And I found that pretty confronting.
Yeah, it's exposure on two fronts, isn't it? I'm doing this thing which I might fail at, and by telling you, I've got to give the impression that actually I do back myself, which is almost just being bad, if not worse, for us self-deprecating clinicians.
Yeah, exactly.
Very honest. Thank you, Virginia. And would any of you be happy to speak about something? I've had conversations with all three of you, I think, about to me, it sounded like quite a transition. You've been beavering away doing your research, often, self-directed and often on your own a lot of the time. And then the research is done. And then, if I understand it correctly, there's this point then where you've almost got to sell it, which is a totally different concept. Would anyone be happy to speak about that?
Yeah,
No?
well, that is, I think, Jo, you know well that is my main problem. Yes, exactly that. Having the confidence in your work, confidence in your voice, amongst people that you know are highly intelligent and of nature critical and analytical, is very scary, and I struggle with massively that kind. And I think everybody says it's scary, but the only way you get through it is with practice. But I've had some very shaky hands and shaky voice at times when I've had to start, and I would say very early in my journey in that process.
Yeah,
I completely agree, Catherine. That's probably one of the worst bits, I think, for some of us.
Do you think there should be more support within the process around that part of it, or could be?
I don't know. It's something that you just have to do, I think, to be able to do it. I mean, because not everybody's the same. You know, I chaired a panel in the autumn, and I spoke to all the other presenters on. You know, they were all physios, and we were chatting the night before, and I said, you know, was my usual kind of shaky voice. I could feel my palms starting to sweat, and I practiced it about 1,000,001 times what I was going to say. And I was talking to them, and they said, "Oh, I just wing it." And I'm like, "God, how on earth?" And I think some people do. You know, it's just the way they're made. And yeah, I don't know.
I can understand that that's in quite contrast to the nature of a person drawn to focused, factual results, evidence-driven work, to then wing it. It's a completely different mindset, isn't it?
Yeah. I definitely have different experiences when I'm presenting to fellow physios than other members of the multidisciplinary team quite often. I think maybe because of differences in education culture and that kind of thing, is that if I'm presenting to obviously smaller, better, gradually getting bigger, but if I'm speaking to a room of physios, then I worry about the judgment of my peers. I want to do a good job representing the work I've done. And I also want to represent, you know, if anyone's invested in my time, I want to do a good job on behalf of them as well. But I definitely know that from positive experiences, I generally find that the questions are curious and that the questions put to you are from people who want to understand more. They're not trying to trip you up. They want to understand more about your work, what's coming next. Often they're clinicians talking to our clinical groups. They want to know, actually, well, how can this change my practice? What should I do differently on Monday based on this information that you're sharing? Whereas I know when I go to some multidisciplinary conferences, I get a bit nervous of some of the more challenging approaches to discussion after a presentation.
Politely put.
I think as well, we spend our days, particularly if you're a clinician, you spend your days on a one-to-one basis. You're very good, you get very skilled at being, and also I find I spend my life making the word simpler. You know, that's what we do. We don't want to complicate things for patients. And then in the academic field, it's the exact opposite. You know, you speak to more than one person and you're meant to use big fancy words and understand what they mean. Or when you hear other people use big fancy words, you're so impressed by them that you want to try and be like that. And that is a skill and it's a practice, but you're kind of thrown into it and you're not very practiced at it.
I think you have
Do
to
you all
develop.
think?
Sorry.
No, go on, Gillian.
I think you have to develop a really tough skin, actually, which is, I don't know about the others. I find that really, really tricky. It's a bit like it's the publishing as well. You know, you've spent all this time working on this, and somebody's going to be critical about it, and that's their job. And sometimes it's fair, and sometimes it's really useful, and sometimes it's really unfair, actually. You know, and I think presenting can be a bit like that. You know, I remember the first presentation I gave, it was multidisciplinary actually, and this bloke stood up and asked this question that I thought, I have no idea what you're asking me, and you think it's just because you're being stupid, and it wasn't till afterwards, and some of the other physios came up and said, "What was that question about?" And I thought, no, but it's developing that ability to kind of go, actually, it's not about me. It's maybe the person not understanding, or, and if you get a poor review for a paper, you kind of have to step back and go, okay, this is not a direct criticism of me. It's just, it's a different point of view.
Yeah. That's really good point, Gillian. And actually, my next question to all of you was going to be if there's any advice you'd give to any other clinicians thinking of going into research. And it sounds like that would be a really important one, Gillian. Just what you've just articulated, being able to separate a question that is about the work rather than how you've done the work is what I heard then. Is there anything else, any of you, in addition, that you would want, or that you would have wanted to know, if someone had been kind enough to share with you before you started your research journey?
Find a great mentor, definitely.
Was it this occupational therapist?
Yeah, absolutely. I had supervisors for my PhD who were lovely people, but not particularly useful. Not particularly helpful in building an academic career. My current mentor has been fantastic. She's a really tough cookie, and she holds me to account. But she's like a terrier, and has been fantastic. And I would never have carried on as long as I have. And you need somebody like that on your side. They make a big difference. And I think my supervisors in my PhD were both male. And I know it's quite sexist to say, but I think having a woman and a therapist as a mentor has been really helpful as well, because they understand kind of some of the other challenges in academia, which can be quite a tough world, I think.
Yeah. And it sounds, I don't hear you saying you just want to have your hand held and someone say they're there. You want someone who is going to give you a realistic representation of what you're getting into and some idea of how to manage that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And they you know that if what they say, you follow what they say, it might be a tough process, because she can be quite tough with me, but at least I know if I submit something, it's got a fighting chance, because you've already gone through the peer review.
So get a good mentor is one great piece of advice. Anything else?
I think just along those lines with the Gillian, the whole process is very much you don't know what's ahead of you. It's a really weird thing. You have to find out what you're going to find out, and so very much you don't know what you don't know. So that's where the mentor or friend, as it were, that's been there before helps. But even within, like we've mentioned, Virginia said, the research community is very helpful. But when people are looking at research and reading research, is actually look behind the paper and actually go and look at the person that's written the research, because usually it's somebody like one of us three and it's on a journey. So you might read the research and go, what was the point in that? That's just silly, and why did they do it like that? And then when you look and you see the rest of their research, it puts it into context of that person, and suddenly, oh wow, they were doing a whole load of research that was at the beginning, and then they learned from that and they moved on. But what that then does, it helps you feel less, just like we were talking about before, sort of less personal about it, as if somebody was, when you can engage with the people behind the research, you understand it much better, and it helps desensitize those kind of negative emotions, I think, a little bit.
Yeah. And I would say follow your curiosity, because these are long journeys. If it's something you're genuinely interested in, you're going to have manage better with some of the ups and downs. But also that will probably lead you to the people you want to have conversations with. I've got a fantastic team of supervisors who are well suited to the project that I'm doing, the area I'm particularly curious in. But my mentor is a clinical academic, because she's very well positioned, living the work life that I'm interested in the future. She's juggling both clinical practice and her academic life, and she's walked that path, so that not just in terms of, oh gosh, I've got this application, but also, as Gillian said, so when that fellowship finishes and I suddenly have to work out that next step, how do I have that conversation with my manager? Things, the actual practicalities of walking that path. Definitely follow your curiosity on subjects, but also actually investigate what would you like that future job to look like if you are a clinician looking at dipping your toe in, and then start those conversations, because you don't have to know exactly where you want it to be, but those people are normally really approachable and happy to have those conversations about what you're interested in and what you might be curious to investigate.
Yeah, really good advice, because the curiosity I hear is the fun bit, alongside the discoveries, but keeping that a bit of a sort of future plan in mind, because I imagine that research is full of rabbit holes that you could go down just because and never emerge from them, and sort of lose sight of the reason you were excited about going into research to start with. All right, I'm going to ask you hopefully an easier question, because it's more general and not necessarily about you guys personally or your own research, although it might be. I'm just, from a nosiness point of view, curious from each of you, if there was a question that you could get answered for physiotherapists in the next 5 years, what would you love somebody out there to research and find an answer to?
Who's going first on this one? That's a really difficult one, because I think physiotherapy is so broad, isn't it? And I think there's so many different areas. As a general thing, I think I would love research to help physiotherapy in the future, to find out which people benefit from which treatments the best. I do feel that technology and data could be useful to us, rather than just opposing it. We need to find out how we can use it to integrate, so that we can then make the most of the resources that we have. But there's the people, we have all these masses of people that need our help, but then we know that each one needs personalized care, but not everybody needs everything. So surely data and new technologies can help us direct that. And so the research could look at how we personalize our treatments, which patients will have the best outcomes from which treatments.
And that could almost be potentially in every sector, couldn't it, of physiotherapy?
Yeah.
That's a great answer.
That's such a brilliant answer, Katherine. I thought about this.
Thanks.
I thought this was the hardest question.
Sorry, I tried to kid you. It was easy.
You were going to ask, and I was thinking, God, it's so broad. And all I could come back with was evidence-based. The current gold standard for evidence-based medicine is just not really fitting kind of what we do. And that N equals 1, how do we approach that? And I know things are changing in terms of complex interventions and the frameworks and all the rest of it, but looking at actually what's best for each patient, that's fantastic. I love that. Thank you, Katherine.
Yeah.
Absolutely, I can completely agree, because we all want to know what's best for us, don't we? If we were in that patient seat, we would want to know, what does the evidence say that I'm going to benefit most from as me as an individual? And if we can subgroup and phenotype our patients more so that the right person gets the right treatment at the right time, is what clinicians always strive for. But if we haven't got the evidence to give them that information, sometimes it feels like you're a little bit blind in that process. When I heard the question, I did think of a slightly cheeky answer, which is probably not the answer you wanted, but it's almost a shout out to all of our community that we can all shape these priorities. I recently went to a priority setting partnership run by the James Lind Alliance for fecal incontinence, where I was there as a clinician. I wasn't there as a researcher. And they invite clinicians, researchers, and people with lived experiences to set the priorities for the direction of research for different conditions and different treatment aspects. So I would say, if you're a clinician, even if you don't want to be doing the research, you're very happy on the front line looking after the patients in front of you. But if you want to get involved in steering the direction of this kind of research, if you see those calls for the priority setting partnerships, I would absolutely say jump in, say yes, come along, because then you can directly influence what is funded next.
So I've never personally been aware of any of those, Virginia. Where are they advertised? How would people know if they were going on?
So the James Lind Alliance does have a website. Often it will be disseminated through your special interest group, that kind of thing. So often, for example, us in pelvic health, they'll share it with the POGP or others. So again, when you're kind of building that community, if you let people know you might be interested, and if you keep an eye out on the websites and their open calls, it's a great way for clinicians to get involved in setting those priorities.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if the other guys would have any other extra tips of how you see the calls.
No, I think it's really interesting, Jim, because I'd actually thought of the same sort of answer, because this question isn't really, about what do you think research should be. It's not really for us to answer. There are people much cleverer than us that have done this before. And I know within musculoskeletal physio, there's a lot of people that come together, experts in the field, and follow frameworks, and they, decide these research priorities. And the James Lind is one of them particularly, but there is specific ones for each area. So it's great as a new researcher to actually look at those as a starting point, and because they tend to be quite broad, and then go, where's my clinical problem? Where does that fit in? And often, invariably, the clinicians can go, oh wow, that's a good. They think that research is that's important, and that's what I'm seeing on the ground. How can the two marry together? And it's this integration of clinical work with research that is so important for the future. Just to make the research actually useful and beneficial to the people on the ground.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that's come across so loud and clear from all three of you, as to why you went into it, what you hope to achieve from it, what you want the outcome to be for recipients of care, but also the fulfillment outcome for people delivering it, feeling like they're really delivering the best standard of care, but also, as all three of you said now, the best standard of care and the most appropriate version of that for the individual in front of them. I'd wholeheartedly agree with. I would love to see that really positive use of technology. I think when we first started talking about AI and the Daily Mail article about exercise sheets, I think our fear around that, as much as a recipient of care as anything else, is, oh, I'm not being seen as an individual. They're going to just slap something generic on me. Whereas to flip that on its head and use technology to do the opposite, and as one of you said, to recognize the individual and tailor it, that to me is a really nice 180-degree flip of what we potentially had some fears around. And I'm not saying, of course, that resolves it. There are huge issues and checks and balances that need to be held in place all along this process, but let's hope it does lead to this place of more genuine person-centered care and more fulfillment for clinicians. So I'm going to wrap the episode up with a huge thank you to all three of you. It's been a really interesting discussion, and I've loved the fact that we have been able to keep bringing it back to clinician well-being and purpose. And I love the fact that you all had smiles on your faces and were able to describe very positive aspects of what you do, as well as a real honesty around the challenges. So thank you. Just before we close up, I would love all of you to share the easiest ways for people to get hold of you or check out your research if they've heard you talk about something that they're interested in, if that's okay. Gillian, could I start with you?
I'm more than happy. I've got a real passion for clinicians coming back into research, or going into research as the first step, and I'm more than happy if anybody wants just to have a chat. You can contact me on my university email, which is gillian.campbell@nottingham.ac.uk. There's a web. Unfortunately, our university website is not the best for navigating. I'm so sorry about that. And I think everybody at the university will agree, sadly. So probably the best thing is just email, or actually I'm the current research lead at the POGP. So if it's pelvic health related, we've got a research network, and you can contact me on that on research at the POGP.co.uk, and please join us if you're pelvic health and certainly a member of POGP. Please join the research network. The whole aim of that is for collaboration and mentoring and peer support.
Yeah, and having not being a pelvic health physio myself, but having given talks and been in some way involved in the POGP, I really makes me want to be a pelvic health physio. It is a really, really nice community.
You're always welcome, Jo.
What were those 4,000 weeks for again? We need 8,000. Catherine, how do people get hold of you?
So I think probably the easiest way is through X or through LinkedIn. Just so with X, I'm at Mcnabb Physio, and LinkedIn, obviously, just through my name, Katherine Mcnabb. Working at Manchester Metropolitan University, and I've got the private practice as well. So those are the two best ways, and then I can contact people back through that.
Can I congratulate you on not going X or Twitter or whatever we call it these days? You finally got over that.
It's like Happy New Year. How long do you leave it to before you
Exactly. We don't have to say that anymore. Virginia, how do people get hold of you?
Well, given what we've just said about X, normally social media might be easier, although I don't know how long I'll stay on X, and I need to work on my LinkedIn. My email that's the shortest and easier to remember is probably my private practice email, which would be virginia@pelvicpainnetwork.co.uk. Do feel free to get in touch.
Lovely. Thank you so much, all of you. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I'm sure people are going to get huge amounts, whether or not they're considering going into research or are already embarking on it and wondering about the journey ahead. So thank you ever so much for being fantastic guests.
Thank you.
Thank you.
you.